If you work in quality control at a candy factory, you know strict safety regulations come with the job. It's why you partner with Grainger. Grainger helps you find the high-quality and compliant products your business needs to inspect, detect, and help correct issues. And the sweetest part is, everyone gets a product that's as safe to eat as it is delicious. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
When you think about businesses like Allbirds or Skims that are selling through the roof, sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and brilliant marketing. But what's often overlooked is the business behind the business that makes it all possible. For millions of businesses, that's Shopify. Nobody does selling better than Shopify, the home of the #1 checkout on the planet. With Shop Pay, you can boost conversions by up to 50%, meaning fewer abandoned carts and way more sales. Whether your customers are scrolling online, strolling through your store, or browsing social media, Shopify ensures you're ready to sell wherever they are. It's no secret, businesses that want to grow, grow with Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout Allbirds uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/DAX, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/DAX to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/DAX.
Hello, my name is Spencer, and in my podcast called The Dictionary, I literally read from the dictionary, but add in my personal comments and stupid jokes to make it more interesting. Episodes are family-friendly, short, and air every single day on basically every podcast platform. Come join me on this journey filled with edutainment.
Hello and welcome to How Did This Not Get Made?
This is the podcast all about the movies you never saw, the scripts that were never filmed, and the ideas that never even made it to the page. My name is David Spencer.
And my name is your father.
Oh boy. This is going to be a big episode, Dan. I think I might be more anxious than excited.
Okay.
Because everybody knows I'm like the resident Star Wars guy. I'm all about the wars.
Yeah.
But when it comes to talking about the sequel trilogy, and specifically when it comes to talking about episode 9, you could very quickly be wading into some hot water.
Yeah.
This might be the kind of episode that could potentially have a lot of people very upset. But also, I think this discussion might save Star Wars. I don't know if that's too big of a claim, but I think I might save Star Wars today.
So here's the thing. We are pretty accustomed to diving into hot water. We've dealt with Tony Goldmark and The Devil's Jester.
We've talked about Snyderverse fans.
Yeah. It's something that we are fairly accustomed to. We are simply here just to report on what happened. Mm-hmm. We are not here to make decisions about Star Wars or the movies that got made or didn't get made, but we are here just to be like, could it have been better? Could it be worse? Who knows?
Yeah. The difference here, though, is that I never cared about Nostalgia Critic. I never had that many opinions about Zack Snyder or the DC movies. Mm-hmm. This is something that I'm coming in already with a lot of opinions.
All right.
And I'm going to do my best, though, to be factual and to be objective and to not let my personal biases get in the way.
All right.
But, I'm just going to warn you now, there's probably going to be a couple of times where my biases and opinions will interrupt things.
Okay. Before we get started, I know this is a visual medium, but I got a shirt recently.
Yeah.
It's a Captain Phasma shirt. It kind of looks like a playing card almost. Like she's on both sides, flipped upside down. It has some of the stormtroopers behind her. I found the shirt literally like 3 days ago at a Buffalo Exchange, and I was like, I have to have it. It's wonderful. And we all know that Captain Phasma is going to show up in the third movie, right?
She should have. Honestly, biggest mistake of both Rise of Skywalker and the Duel of the Fates script, Captain Phasma doesn't come back.
What?
She just should come back. all the time.
Because she fell down into a bottomless pit, which no one in the history of Star Wars, if they fall down into a bottomless pit, that means that they never die.
Yeah. Just look at Darth Maul, look at Palpatine.
And he was cut in half. Darth Maul was cut in half, and he still came back. So Captain Phasma, she could have come back. It would have been great.
My pet theory is that I would have loved it if she was actually a clone. And so the Captain Phasma we see in Last Jedi is a different clone than the Captain Phasma we see in Force Awakens. That would have been fun. But
that would have been.
Regardless, we are here today to talk about Duel of the Fates, Colin Trevorrow's ill-fated Episode 9 script. Again, I'm going to do my best to stick to the facts.
Yes.
Before we get too much into Duel of the Fates, I think we need to kind of paint a picture about where Star Wars in general was at the time and Lucasfilm in general was at the time. So, to start off with my unbiased facts, Kathleen Kennedy is an extremely talented producer and one of the most respected people in Hollywood.
Honestly, she has, along with like Steven Spielberg, has probably not just shaped a ton of movies, but like influential movies.
Oh, yeah. And this is something that right off the bat, I'm going to lose some angry Star Wars fanboys who don't want to admit that Kathleen Kennedy's career is impressive. Her producing credits include E.T., The Color Purple, Money Pit, Hook, Indian in the Cupboard, Jurassic Park, Twister, The Sixth Sense, AI, Seabiscuit, The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, Lincoln, and more. And those are just movies where she is the producer.
Yeah.
I left off anything that was executive producer or associate producer.
She was so involved with like Jurassic Park as a producer that they even included her in the Weird Al Jurassic Park music video, in which they made a claymation version of her in the music video. That's how prominent she is as a producer in these movies. Yes.
And if we open up to movies that she was an associate producer on or executive on, we've got Back to the Future, The Goonies, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Land Before Time, Indiana Jones, Balto. She has such a massive influence from everybody from Spielberg to Shyamalan in creating movies, especially that era of movies of 80s genre films going into the 90s, and helped co-found Amblin Entertainment. She is a big, big deal in the world of entertainment.
Yeah, honestly, if you took away every movie that she was involved with, you would have little to nothing in front of you. If you looked at your wall of DVDs, your collection right there, more than half of them would be gone.
Yes, absolutely. She started working in film as the assistant to producer John Milius on the set of Spielberg's 1941, and it was on that set that she got the attention of Spielberg. In an interview with NPR, he said, "I remember Kathy came into the room with her steno pad and her pencil, and she was horrible at taking notes. But what she did know how to do was interrupt somebody in mid-sentence."
Interesting.
She became super vocal in the creative process, and rather that feeling like a detriment, Spielberg was like, oh, she's actually got really great ideas, and so hired her as the producer for E.T. From there, she helped co-found Amblin, and she also co-founded the Kennedy Marshall Company with her husband, Frank Marshall, who is also legendary Hollywood producer. They are like the Hollywood producing power couple. So she had this massive prolific career. In May 2012, George Lucas announced that he was leaving Lucasfilm and would be hiring Kathleen Kennedy as a co-chair. It was not a surprise to anybody at the time that George Lucas was looking to retire. You know, we talked about Star Wars Underworld and Star Wars Detours and how those shows never got really off the ground. And after kind of that, it totally makes sense to me that George Lucas is just like, I don't have the energy for this anymore, and I want to hand the reins off to somebody else. Kathleen Kennedy is a perfect choice. You know, they worked together on Indiana Jones. She's such a close friend with Spielberg and that whole community. What surprised a lot of people, though, is that Kathleen Kennedy would take the job, especially leaving her company that has her name on it. She left the Kennedy Marshall Company to go work for Lucasfilm. And at the time, Why would major big shot Hollywood producer Kathleen Kennedy leave to go work at a studio that's just cranking out an animated series and doesn't really have anything else it's working on?
Well, this is going to fall under my theory, like with the creator of Samurai Jack and Dexter's Lab and Powerpuff Girls,
Tartakovsky.
My theory is if George Lucas asks you to work on a Star Wars, you work on a Star Wars.
That's true. Absolutely. But I think it's also kind of leads to the fact that there was already talks of Lucasfilm making sequel movies again and like ramping back up. And I think there probably would have been even talks for the Disney buyout at the time, because only 3 months after that announcement was made, it was announced that Lucasfilm would be purchased by Disney, with Kathleen Kennedy running Lucasfilm and George Lucas officially stepping away, and they would be immediately going into pre-production on Star Wars Episode 7.
Yes.
Again, I feel like there's a lot about the behind-the-scenes narrative that fans kind of assume, especially when it comes to George Lucas's involvement. It really feels to me like the talks to sell to Disney, the talks to have Kathleen Kennedy run it, and the talks to make future movies had been going on for like a year before all of this happened. I feel like there must have been a longer lead-in to this plan happening.
Yeah. I don't know where this falls along in the story, or this might be too early, but I remember watching behind the scenes of Force Awakens, and the person to make the announcement for who the director was, J.J. Abrams, was Kathleen Kennedy. She was the one that actually held and was probably one of the first people to know that that is who they chose and made the announcement to Disney and to Lucasfilm.
First of all, great news in that we have a director as of about an hour ago, which seems to have hit the press already, which is J.J. Abrams.
I think it's kind of inarguable that more than any single person, she had more creative control over the sequel trilogy and over Star Wars as a whole for the last 10 years, more than anybody else. Going into her history is really important to help understand like why she made the decisions that she made with who to hire and oftentimes who to fire as they were making these movies. Yeah, she has a lot of control over that, and that means a lot of people who don't like the direction of the sequel trilogy put a lot of blame on Kathleen Kennedy. But what a lot of those people conveniently forget to acknowledge is that she was the only person who worked on the sequel trilogy who was chosen by George Lucas. I think the only other person was Michael Arndt, was originally chosen in conjunction with George Lucas to work on a draft, and then he was fired and replaced with Lawrence Kasdan, who had done Star Wars in the past, so like there's connection there, but still, Kathleen Kennedy was the only person that George Lucas said, yes, this is who I want to be making these movies. This is speculation on my part, but I feel like the reason that Lucas hired Kathleen Kennedy is because of her reputation of championing filmmakers first. What I mean by that is, if you compare that to something like Marvel and Kevin Feige, which a lot of people do, Kevin Feige chooses the story and characters first and then finds the right director to match that. But I think Kathleen Kennedy is more interesting in choosing the director first and then saying, okay, what do you want to make? Josh Trank, he was supposed to do a Boba Fett standalone. When he was fired, that didn't just mean we're going to give the Boba Fett story to somebody else. That meant we're not doing the Boba Fett story anymore.
Oh.
Well, not until a couple months from now when we're going to see Robert Rodriguez's version of Boba Fett, which is going to be great.
Yes.
I feel like when she hires a filmmaker, she lets them do what they want. And instead of saying, no, don't do that, do this, if it doesn't go their way, she leaves the project or fires the filmmaker.
Yeah.
And I feel like this choice is a double-edged sword. I feel like that's how you get something like Sixth Sense, directed by Shyamalan, who is a very new filmmaker, untested filmmaker, and here's Kathleen Kennedy saying, I trust what this guy is going to make and can make something spectacular. But it also means that she produced The Last Airbender to a very different result.
It sounds like she's more hands-off
afterwards.
So she knows, and trusts a lot of these filmmakers to make the right decisions and is like, I'm going to just leave you be and I'm just going to help you make what you envision.
Absolutely. And it feels obvious to me why George Lucas would value that as well, because Lucas is somebody who always fancied himself as one of these 70s auteur filmmakers. He wanted creative control over Star Wars. Before Lucasfilm was hired by Disney, it was the most successful independent film company of all time, because people forget that Lucasfilm was an independent company. It went to Fox for distribution, but Lucas was still producing them himself, and he wanted that creative control. I feel like, and again, this is speculation, but it seems to me like Lucas hired Kathleen Kennedy because he wanted that tradition to continue with the new movies of letting a filmmaker make what they want.
Okay.
2012, Lucasfilm was bought by Disney, and they immediately started working on the films. In January 2013, after a long search with every filmmaker under the sun interviewed, they announced the director of Episode 7, J.J. Abrams. I'm not going to go too much into the production of Force Awakens or The Last Jedi. One thing to point out is that it's a pretty common understanding that the trilogy was not planned out from the start. They didn't sit down and say, okay, what are the questions we're going to ask and what are the answers to those questions? What are the big plot points that we're going to hit over the course of the trilogy?
Yeah, and this is something that kind of is a trope with J.J. Abrams, and we saw this more so with his show Lost.
Yes.
When he started Lost, he is great at starting a lore. He's great at world building, and even though Star Wars is already a world that is already built, there was so many new concepts in so much of this world that he just kind of tapped into, and he did it brilliantly with the first movie to create essentially this world that we thought we knew and created a whole new one. J.J. Abrams is great at starting stuff, but then, like again, we saw with Lost, not so great at the ending part of it.
Yeah. The problems that I have with Rise of Skywalker and the problems that I do have with a sequel trilogy on a whole, which I like more than I dislike, and I'm happy that it exists. The way J.J. Abrams makes his movies and the way he thinks about mysteries, he gets people excited about mysteries without necessarily having the satisfying answer to those mysteries. And I think that combined with toxic online fandom is what kind of caused a lot of things to be haywire in people's expectations, not meeting it. Based off of Kathleen Kennedy's, what I'm assuming is her philosophy of letting the filmmaker do their thing for each movie, I feel like she should have hired somebody different for Force Awakens, who is somebody who is not thinking about, I'm going to ask questions now that are going to be answered in the future, just thinking about their own movie. And maybe some questions naturally come up, but it's less about, ooh, let's create a mystery that's going to get people speculating, and more about, let me create an interesting story with interesting characters. That's how the originals were done. I mean, nobody was questioning who Luke's father was, so it wasn't a mystery we were getting an answer to. It was just a big surprise.
Yeah. I don't know if you've ever heard J.J. Abrams' TED Talk before and his concept behind filmmaking.
And the mystery box?
Yeah. For those who don't know, he has a mystery box. It's like this big box that has a big question mark on it. I believe it is like a magic kit. But the thing is that this is a box where he doesn't know what's in it until you open it up and see what the actual magic pieces are inside. But he has made it a point that he never opens that box.
The thing is that it represents infinite possibility. It represents hope. It represents potential. And what I love about this box, and what I realized I sort of do in whatever it is that I do, is I find myself drawn to infinite possibility and that sense of potential. And I realize that mystery is the catalyst for imagination.
But he keeps that box in his office because he likes that mentality of like writing a story about what could potentially be in the box, but never actually opening it. So this kind of gives you the mentality, like when you look at Lost, when you look at a lot of the movies that he does, like you're bringing up that he was bringing up a lot of questions. It's understandable from listening to that TED Talk that he would suddenly just come up with a bunch of new questions, which is kind of why him creating a world he's so good at, because he's kind of able to like poke your brain to be like, hey, pay attention to this thing because it might be big later. Hey, pay attention to this thing. And you're all of a sudden more intrigued in the story than you really should have been. Instead of following along, you're now watching the movie and then asking questions. So like something like Rey's parents, which really shouldn't have been an issue or could have just been like, she's no one. He suddenly opened it up to be like, hey, Rey was abandoned and her parents are gone. And then I'm going to leave that as a mystery. And now you guys have to think about it.
And that's one of the reasons I am a massive Last Jedi fanboy. And one of the things specifically, I love the reveal of Rey's parents being nobodies. Mm-hmm. I always get bugged by people saying that Rian Johnson was trying to go against what J.J. Abrams was setting up, where I feel like he was trying to follow through on J.J. Abrams' film and on J.J. Abrams' philosophy. If J.J. Abrams' philosophy is, I'm going to introduce this mystery and the answer will never be as satisfying as what the question is, then you have Rian Johnson taking that and say, okay, because the answer can never be satisfying, I'm going to make this story about how the answer is not going to be satisfying. And I'm going to make it about that philosophy and dealing with that failure, dealing with that disappointment. And so that's why, to me, what Rian Johnson did in The Last Jedi is exactly carrying on with what J.J. Abrams set up. This is something that we've known about J.J. Abrams for forever. Yeah. The Christmas episode of Community, Abed's Under Controllable Christmas. He opens up the box with The Secret of Christmas, and what's inside?
It's
season 1 of Lost on DVD.
It's the first season of Lost on DVD.
That's the meaning of Christmas?
No, it's a metaphor. It represents lack of payoff.
And when you try to make the answer as big as the question is, like we saw in Rise of Skywalker, where you have the association with Palpatine and Rey, and you're just like, but that doesn't fully make sense. Like, why do this?
Yeah.
You didn't have to do it, but because you put the question, you put that mystery up on a pedestal, now the answer needs to be grandiose. It needs to be so big for the audience to be like, wow, that was a big reveal that Palpatine fucks. When looking back at it, you're just like, that's a ridiculous concept.
I definitely am going into my own Star Wars opinions. There's one more thing about this that I do want to point out, though. When people say that there was no plan, I think a lot of people also assume that there was no communication between the filmmakers. And that we know is untrue. Rian Johnson was hired during the production of Force Awakens and would frequently visit the set. He was writing his movie while they were filming Force Awakens, and he even made a request to J.J. Abrams for a small change in the ending. There's something about the ending of the movie that's only there because Rian Johnson specifically requested it. Do you want to take a guess as to what it is?
So is this like the very end where we see Luke?
The last scene, he made a change for one small thing to be different.
Okay. My guess is that Rey actually hands the lightsaber to Luke, and Luke turns on the lightsaber, and Rian Johnson asks to please do not have him hold it. Don't have him turn it on. From what I remember from the second one, he doesn't care about it, and he wants to put that behind him. So that's my guess.
That's a really great guess. It's a lot more subtler than that. It would be very difficult to guess.
Is it the Porgs?
No. Originally, BB-8 was supposed to go with Rey and Chewbacca, and he requested for BB-8 to stay behind and R2 to go instead, because he wanted to set up the moment of R2 giving the Leia message as one of the final things that would actually convince Luke to be the hero again.
Okay.
That was his one request, is that originally it was supposed to be BB-8, and he said, actually, can we make it be R2? Which it's funny that people criticize Rian Johnson for just wanting to change up tradition and go against your expectations, and literally he requested for something to be more nostalgic than what Easter egg J.J. Abrams had originally written.
Okay.
I just got to say one more thing about the whole trilogy not being planned out being a problem, because this is something that really irks me. The original trilogy was not planned out at all.
That was going to be one of my questions, was like, how planned out was the first one? And in juxtaposition, how planned out was the prequel trilogy?
The prequel trilogy was a lot more planned out because you had a specific endpoint. And in fact, a lot of the beats of Revenge of the Sith, especially the fact that Obi-Wan and Anakin duel on a lava planet and Anakin gets burned up by lava and becomes Darth Vader.
Yeah.
That was something that they knew was going to happen before they started writing Phantom Menace.
Okay.
When it comes to the original trilogy, George Lucas really thought about it as this big, grand, sweeping epic and wanted it to be an epic, but he did not have the specific plot points beat out at all.
Mm-hmm.
The original draft of Empire Strikes Back has Luke talking to the ghost of his father, who is telling him to kill Darth Vader, because Darth Vader was not his father in one of the drafts of Empire Strikes Back. When Yoda says, no, there is another, he was talking about Luke's sister, who was not going to be Leia. And in Return of the Jedi, they decided, let's just make those the same character.
So then the idea of Leia and Luke kissing in the first film suddenly makes more sense, because he didn't know. He didn't know they were going to end up as siblings.
This is something I get frustrated by as well, because I feel like the way people talk about media, especially just like online fandom, gets so plot obsessed and so much about the plot beats. And if there's a plot hole, that's the biggest crime that anybody can make. For me, I am much more interested in theme. I'm much more interested in characters. That's why I can ignore that it makes no sense how Indiana Jones ended up on that island where they opened up the Ark of the Covenant when they literally traveled by submarine to get there. Or the fact that he literally means nothing to the story at all. Like, the story would be the exact same thing if he just wasn't present. They still would have opened up the Ark and been vaporized by the Angel of Death. But that's not...
What's the theory that had the events of Indiana Jones still happened even if Indiana Jones wasn't there?
It would be the exact same thing. They would still get the Ark, they'd still take it to that island to open it up, and they'd still all get their faces melted. But we don't watch that for the plot beats. We watch it because of the character and the relationship between Indy and Miriam and the ideas and the setting. People get so bent about a shape about plot, but I really truly feel like between filmmakers, the conversations that J.J. Abrams would have had with Rian Johnson, or the conversations that Rian Johnson would have had with Colin Trevorrow or J.J. Abrams, would have been about the characters, would have been about the themes, would about who we want to see Rey become more than who her parents were.
Yes.
So throughout the year of 2015, Lucasfilm made a ton more directing announcements. They announced Rogue One to be directed by Gareth Edwards. In 2014, actually, I skipped over this. In 2014 is when they announced Rian Johnson would be writing and directing Episode 8. They announced an unknown standalone that was going to be headed by Fantastic Four director Josh Trank, and Episode 9 to be directed by Colin Trevorrow. They made all of these announcements before Force Awakens even came out.
Wow.
But that also means they were giving a long lead time, production time for these sequel movies. And again, I think they wanted to have the directors to be in communication with each other to be able to have some of that connective tissue thematically. I want to go now into Colin Trevorrow. What do you know about Colin Trevorrow?
I remember Safety Not Guaranteed. And then I remember when we did our Jurassic Park 4 episode, we talked about him and his involvement.
He has a career that I feel like has become pretty similar with a lot of filmmakers of this time. Do an indie film that becomes a Sundance hit, immediately get handed the keys to the kingdom of a massive franchise. In 2012, his first feature film, Safety Not Guaranteed, came out, was a big hit at Sundance. I saw that movie that year as well. I did not actually like it that much. I don't even really remember why I didn't like it, but I just remember being like, I don't see what everybody else sees in this movie. It just didn't click for me for some reason. This got the attention of a lot of filmmakers and producers and would eventually lead to him directing Jurassic World. Do you know how he got the job of Jurassic World, though?
I cannot recall from the notes.
He got hired because Brad Bird was not hired for Force Awakens.
That's what it was. Yes. I remember actually writing that down. Here's the thing with my memory is that if you encounter me outside of the podcast and start asking me about all these movies, I can't recall any names whatsoever because I write them down so that I do not have to remember them at all.
So Brad Bird is the director of Iron Giant and The Incredibles, and at the time had just come off of his first live-action movie, Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, which was a massive success. And he was one of the many, many directors who had meetings with Lucasfilm and Kathleen Kennedy to directing Star Wars. And he was a real favorite to be chosen as the director. And I think of the directors that I heard about that I was the most excited about the idea of them directing Star Wars, he was one of the people at the top of the list for me. But for Episode 7 to be released on the schedule that Disney wanted, it would have meant that he had to leave Tomorrowland. And he was already like partway through filming it. He was extremely passionate about this. He did not want to abandon it. But you don't want to say no to Star Wars. This is Star Wars.
Yeah.
In order to try to get to stay on the project, he suggested to Kathleen Kennedy, hey, I know this up-and-coming filmmaker who thinks a lot like me named Colin Trevorrow. What if we have him come on to start the production of the film, and then when I finish with Tomorrowland, I'll come on and finish the whole process up.
Yeah.
Kathleen Kennedy and Lucasfilm decided they didn't want to do that. They'd rather have just one consistent voice. But Frank Marshall, when he was producing Jurassic World, was trying to find a director for this Jurassic Park movie and was talking to his wife, Kathleen Kennedy, one day, who suggested, hey, I heard about this Colin Trevorrow guy. Maybe he will be good for this movie.
This kind of feels like the whole Halo situation where they couldn't get Peter Jackson. And Peter Jackson was like, you know what? Since you can't get me, I know this other filmmaker who's going to be great. His name is Neil Blomkamp. He's excellent. He's going to do great with the Halo movie.
And I think it's also just another story of how everyone in Hollywood is related and knows each other.
Yes.
And is married to each other. So Jurassic World was a massive success, smashed box office records. It was the film to reach $1 billion in an international gross faster than any other movie before. Immediately, people were treating Trevorrow like Hollywood's newest wonder kid, that he was going to be the next Spielberg, can do no wrong type of filmmaker.
Oh, no. He's going to fall under the trope of M. Night Shyamalan.
You never want your second film to be a smash success. You want it to be a slow incline.
Yeah, I feel like calling someone the next Spielberg is going to get you in trouble. It is the kiss of death.
Just 2 months after Jurassic World's released, it was announced that Colin Trevorrow would be writing and directing Star Wars Episode 9. Now, following this announcement, there was immediately some pushback among some film fans. There was a conversation happening among critics and in media spaces at the time about the lack of opportunities given to female directors.
Okay.
And while Star Wars, the next two movies they had coming out, Force Awakens and Rogue One, were both going to be headed by a female lead, there was still this idea that was really unfortunate that of the 5 directors that Lucasfilm had hired at the time, every single one of them were white men. Kathleen Kennedy responded to this by saying, there's nothing we'd like more than to find a female director for Star Wars. We need to not go to a filmmaker who's done one movie and expect them to come in and do something the size of Star Wars without having an opportunity to find other movies they can do along the way.
Okay.
This made a lot of people even more upset because they're like, hey, you just hired Colin Trevorrow, who did exactly that. He had one movie and then was hired for Jurassic World. So why are we expecting this line to our female directors when you're not expecting this from your male directors? And Colin Trevorrow had some comments to this as well that definitely landed him in hot water. The LA Times published an article about the kind of hit or miss success of these massive tent poles that were being directed by untested directors, because this was definitely a thing at the time, and all of these directors being male. Colin Trevorrow took this personally and said, quote, "It hurts my feelings when I'm used as an example of white male privilege." In response to this, someone on Twitter asked him point blank, do you think if you were a female director in Hollywood, you would have gotten the chance to direct Jurassic World? And Colin Trevorrow responded with a massive wall of text that started out by saying, I want to believe that a filmmaker with both the desire and ability to make a studio blockbuster will be given an opportunity to make their case. He did not say no.
Yeah.
I feel like in those cases, that's not necessarily the director's fault.
No, it isn't.
It definitely is the fault of the team choosing the director.
Yeah. But he is the face of it at this point, and he needs to come up with an answer. Otherwise, he looks like he's opposing it. Not saying no that's such a hard question to answer.
It is a hard question to answer. I also feel like he put himself in that position by saying it hurts my feelings when people use me as an example for white male privilege.
Yeah, that's not
like,
the best.
Oh, buddy, don't do that.
That's not a good way to phrase it. And
yeah.
I think he was reaching for something else. It sounds like one of those phrases that once he said it out loud, he thinks to himself, oh no, what did I just say?
Possibly. He could also be kind of oblivious, egotistical.
That's true.
White man.
We don't know him. We don't know his personality.
Yeah.
So
all we can go off of is a handful of quotes given to articles and that were posted on Twitter at the time. And I think it is also, I haven't seen Jurassic World, so I don't know if you have a say on this, but I do know there were some criticisms about sexism in Jurassic World and the writing of Bryce Dallas Howard's character.
From watching the movie, I remember Bryce Dallas Howard, she is in the CEO, or not the CEO position, but she is in a position of higher power. She is like the number 2 in the company, but she is the one who is running the park.
I think the vibe that I always got from that, though, is that she's like the too tight-laced CEO who just needs to loosen up, which is a trope that definitely has some sexism in it.
Yes, it definitely had that feeling. Because she's strict, she's passionate, she is looked upon as the bitch.
Yeah.
Like, she is looked upon as not a pleasant person to be around. There are moments in there that, like, tried to feel empowering, but also you have a scene where she's running away from a T-Rex in high heels. And you're like, I don't know about that.
It's an attempt to be empowering, but it's still coming from too much of a male gaze.
Yeah, there was another problematic part in the movie. It was the part where the assistant, who is a woman who is looking over the 2 kids, she gets attacked by a pterodactyl. And the sequence felt like it went on for like 20 seconds too long. We had focused on her for so long, just getting mutilated, getting beat up, getting attacked by these dinosaurs. And after that whole sequence, you just think to yourself, why did I watch that for so long? Like, why was so much of this movie committed to just that one attack? And it didn't really contribute to the film other than she was a more significant character, so I guess her death needs to be more significant than, say, an extra that were just getting mowed down by all the other pterodactyls. So that was another problematic point that I feel like was unintentional, but when you look at it, it doesn't feel right. It doesn't leave a good taste in your mouth after you watch that sequence.
Just from how I didn't really care for Safety Not Guaranteed when it first came out, and B, the things that I had heard about Jurassic World and the kind of movie it was. I personally was somebody at the time that was not really much of a fan of the Colin Trevorrow hiring decision.
Yeah.
And I wasn't really that interested in watching Jurassic World. I really should just watch it sometime, but there was a totally different group of people, though, who wanted Colin Trevorrow straight up fired. But this is, of course, a bunch of angry fanboys who had a petition to try to get George Lucas replaced as the director of Episode 9. As if George Lucas would want to.
Yeah.
That petition happened right after the release of Force Awakens. I don't go too much into fan reactions to the movies in this. I feel like it does kind of play into the firing decisions, but I think there's more that we'll get into later that goes into how Rise of Skywalker happened. What I do think is interesting, though, that Force Awakens, I feel like now is kind of regarded as like everybody thought it was a pretty good film.
Yeah.
I feel like Star Wars fans on all sides are all like, yeah, Force Awakens was fun.
Yes.
But I do remember it having a more contentious feeling at the time. And I think it's just because people got way more upset about later films that everybody's kind of fine with Force Awakens now. Because people realized that they had so many expectations going into Force Awakens and how it hit some of those and didn't hit others. Also, like the mystery box element and being unsure about like if they're going to be able to pay off those answers. I feel like there was definitely a sense of fear among Star Wars fans of like, Is this going to go okay? I don't know. This is what I liked, but there's still some things I'm unsure about. You get Force Awakens and you get fans who just are full of fear. Last Jedi comes along and then fandom is just ripped with anger. Mm-hmm. And that means when Rise of Skywalker finally comes out, what's left? Suffering.
Yeah.
That's how the fans respond to that. Sorry, that doesn't have anything to do with anything. I just thought of that the other day and it was like, oh man, if you track fandom reaction to the sequel trilogy, it's fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, and hate leads to suffering.
Yes.
During this time, in the early days of Colin Trevorrow's working on the movie, he did a ton of interviews talking about the scope of Episode 9 that he wanted, and he was promising that there would be satisfying answers to the questions of Rey's parentage, which was something that somebody asked him point blank, and he said, oh yeah, it's going to be great. Which, directors are going to say that kind of stuff, even if they haven't started writing yet. There was one thing that I found that I wanted to highlight. Somebody asked about Rian Johnson, and he said, quote, Rian and I are working closely together to make sure our stories build off of each other and continue to evolve and take us to new places. I think that's what the fans expect and what they want.
Yeah.
And again, this was January 2016 that this interview happened, before Last Jedi came out, before this narrative that we have now of the directors not working with each other. The narrative that we have now that the directors didn't talk to each other, I think, is patently false, because I feel like if Colin Trevorrow and Rian Johnson were working that closely together, Rian Johnson and J.J. Abrams were also working that closely together. Probably the wildest idea that he threw out there came from a panel that he did at Sundance in 2016, talking about the importance of film versus digital.
Oh, like the physical, like celluloid film.
Yes, exactly.
Versus shooting digital. Yes.
And he was talking about how Episode 9 was going to be shot on film. He was very adamant on that.
Curious about that. J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson, what format did they film on?
They both shot on film as well.
Okay.
I believe Rogue One and Solo were digital, but I know 7, 8, and 9 were on film. Do you know what the first big budget movie to ever shoot on a digital camera was?
Wasn't that Star Wars Episode 2?
Yep. Attack of the Clones is what started the digital filmmaking trend.
Yes, I do remember that because it was a trivia question at Madame Tussauds.
Oh, yes, of course. On this panel, he was talking about how he wanted to shoot Episode 9 in IMAX cameras. He said that he wants to shoot it on location.
I don't understand on location, like in space?
Quote, I asked the question, is it possible for us to shoot IMAX film plates in actual space for Star Wars? And I haven't gotten an answer yet. So yes, Colin Trevorrow, at the very least, threw out the idea that he wanted to film in space.
That is interesting because in recent news, they actually did shoot actual footage for a film in space recently. Oh. I forget what the actual details are, but they were able to get footage that was shot in space that they're going to be using in a movie.
Was that part of the William Shatner flight?
I didn't even think about that, but that would be funny if it was.
So yeah, over the next 2 years, Trevorrow and his writing partner, Derek Connolly, worked on the script. And thanks to a leak that happened in 2020, we have a copy of that script and its planned title, Duel of the Fates.
Yes.
I'm going to go into the plot line of Duel of the Fates. Now, I went ahead and read the script, but I believe you read the graphic novel adaptation.
Yes. So there is an excellent graphic novel adaptation. It is done by Andrew Weingarner. Like all of us, he read the leaked Trevorrow Colony Duel of the Fates. He found a bunch of concept art for Duel of the Fates as well, and he used a lot of that as inspiration for him. I will say he's a good artist. I wouldn't put him on par as like a great graphic novelist, but it still comes across pretty well. Honestly, he did a pretty excellent job doing this. It's something that I really enjoy that he did in the graphic novel is that he took some of the stage directions that you see in the script and he actually put it into the graphic novel itself. So it's not just him and his interpretation. You get a sense of like what the script is saying. On top of that, you kind of get this internal monologue for each of the characters whenever it needs to be introduced.
Do you know if it's like word for word direct adaptation of like every line unaltered?
I believe so. I can't confirm.
Okay. I haven't read it, so I'm curious to go back to it now that I've read the script.
Yeah, let me read what he wrote about this. After he did issue 1 of this, he made like 6 issues, which compiles and makes up the whole movie. He said, like many fans, I was disappointed with The Rise of Skywalker, a reread of Return of the Jedi that didn't seem to follow the trajectory of the story set up in The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi. I was thrilled that Colin Trevorrow and Derek Connolly's Duel of the Fates leaked both the script and amazing production art, which he actually has links to, which I incorporated into my adaptation. Having read Duel of the Fates, I can state that I enjoy it much more than The Rise of Skywalker. My hope is that seeing the script visually in my free webcomic adaptation will people know what could or should have been. My biggest issue with The Rise of Skywalker is all of Rey's agency is completely taken away as a character. She's now only important because of who she descends from. And as a woman, she no longer has her own power, she has his power. Now, Duel of the Fate is an interesting piece of Star Wars lore. It is not canon, and yet it's not fan fiction either, for it was supposed to be Episode 9, set in film for almost a year, from December 16, 2016 to September 2017, when Trevorrow left the project. Furthermore, The Rise of Skywalker is essentially an adaptation of Duel of the Fates. So much of the WGA, the Writers Guild of America, forced Lucasfilm to give Trevorrow and Connolly story credit for The Rise of Skywalker. I have compiled a list of similarities between the two, and you can actually see that whole Venn diagram right there. Star Wars is our new mythology. As such, multiple iterations of the story should be able to exist alongside each other. My dream would be for Marvel to agree to publish my adaptation as a Legends version of Episode 9, as Dark Horse Comics used to do, publishing the Star Wars, which was Ritzner and Mayhew, Star Wars Infinities, and 2005's Star Wars Visionaries, where Darth Maul's robotic legs were introduced in the story by Aaron McBride. So that kind of gives you a good mentality as to why he did this. And honestly, it's a really good interpretation, and I highly recommend if you are interested. Obviously, you're listening to us right now. If you're really interested in Star Wars and seeing these visuals, I will put a link in the description. I highly recommend reading through this comic.
There is one thing he said in there that I came to a different conclusion about the way something happened based off of what I was reading, but I'm going to save that and get into that in a bit. The movie opens on the famous planet Kuat, one of the planets that has been named in Star Wars, but we had yet to see in a movie, with an undercover mission to take out an Imperial base. Rose, Finn, Poe, and BB-8 get into trouble with stormtroopers, but are rescued by Rey. She now wears all black and wields a double-bladed blue lightsaber built from the pieces of Anakin's lightsaber and her own staff.
Something that I want to bring up right away is that I love that they brought in Rose, and she has a much more predominant role in this script than what she did.
She gets more to do in the first 5 pages of this script than she does in the entirety of Rise of Skywalker.
Yeah, right away, I think she's the first major character, unless we count in BB-8.
But she's the first dialogue.
Yeah, I'm so happy, right away, that we got to see Rose.
And we get a fun Star Wars set piece that ends with them stealing a Star Destroyer. We also get a budding relationship between Poe and Rey. There's a lot of Star Wars ships, meaning relationship, fandoms, pairings. I think Poe and Rey is probably the only one that I did not hear anybody online talking about who they wanted together.
No.
But Colin Trevorrow, I guess, saw something in that relationship. There's also a lot of other details right away. The script fleshes out the Knights of Ren more. The ghost of Luke shows up pestering Kylo Ren, which is fulfilling his promise from the end of The Last Jedi, where he says, "See you around, kid."
I really like that. I like how he's just kind of peppered in there to be you're going in the wrong direction. He's like, "Shut up, old man. nope, you're not going there.
Yep. Which I love. That's one of the things that I've heard a lot of Star Wars fans talk about. An idea that we never saw in any of the movies. One of these Force ghosts pestering a villain instead of just trying to help out a hero, which I think is a really cool idea.
It's a really great concept. It's Uncle Iroh and Zuko type narrative.
Absolutely. And we also get a better look at what it's like for normal people to live under the subjugation of the fascist First Order.
Yeah.
Which is something that is also sorely missing from the sequel trilogy, in my opinion.
Well, we kind of saw it.
We get it in Last Jedi.
Yeah.
I think the question of how do these factions work and what is it like for the people living in this universe is something that I wish we got more in the movies that we got.
Yeah, the universe feels more lived in rather than just following our heroes. Like whenever I watch The Crown, it's just about the people who are in royalty and we don't really get to see like the people that actually like live under them. Whereas like Downton Abbey, they actually have a good balance of like the upper crust and the servants who are living in the house as well. So you get that good like balance between the two. So we kind of get that in here and I really enjoy that.
Yeah. And we get a scene of some unrest of refugees and commoners in the streets of Coruscant. There's a conversation between Hux and his war council with a great line, "You can silence planets, not people."
Yes.
In this universe, they've cut off connection between the planets so they can't communicate with each other. But I love this idea that the people are still going to try to rise up. It's reminiscent of Leia's line in A New Hope.
The more you tighten your grip, Tarkin, the more star systems will slip through your fingers.
In the way that it's written, there's not a whole lot of Easter egg references that we got in Force Awakens and a little bit in Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker. But there are a couple of things where there's lines that are referencing other kind of not so famous lines from the original trilogy. There's a moment where Ghost Luke is talking to Rey about something. I don't remember what sets this up, but he says, "So was I, if you remember." Oh, I think she talks about somebody being a myth, and he says, "So was I, if you remember," which is...
Yes. No, it's the planet that she's looking for, where the original balance of the Sith and the Jedi.
Yes.
And she's like, "I'm looking for this place. As far as I know, it's a myth." And she's like, "Well, if you remember, I was a myth, and you found me."
That's word for word a line that Obi-Wan says to Yoda.
Much anger in him. Like his father.
Was I any different when you told me?
We get Kylo Ren talking to Hux about finding an ancient Sith power, and he says the ability to destroy a planet will be insignificant, which is a reference to Vader's line in A New Hope.
Don't be too proud of this technological terror you've constructed. The ability to destroy a planet is insignificant next to the power of the Force.
One line that I did not like, and maybe the delivery of this would make it better, but there's a scene where they're flying away. Rose tells 3PO, "Tell me the odds, 3PO. I like numbers."
Oh, yeah.
I assumed that was supposed to be sarcastic, but it was still like, it didn't work for me.
Yeah, I think it had to be in the delivery, but that felt kind of odd and felt more forced than it felt natural. Yeah.
Yes. So after this opening sequence, Kylo Ren is going to search for the planet Mortis to find an ancient Sith power, and Rey is drawn to that planet as well by a vision, and she believes that she has to face down Kylo Ren there. Have you ever heard of Mortis before, Dan?
I have not. Not before I read this script, no.
So this is actually something from the Clone Wars series. One of the arcs of Clone Wars has Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka kind of get lost and end up on this planet that's like not supposed to be there, and they're not sure how they got there or if like it's even real. Like the whole arc feels like it could just be a dream sequence. They meet these original 3 Force users, and so there is the son who is all dark side and evil, there's the daughter who is all light side and good, and then there is the father who is kind of the balance between them. So it's kind of like a Trinity thing there, but it's like father, son, and daughter. There's a lot of really cool things in that episode. It's very like philosophy of the Force type of thing. There's a great moment that always sticks with me from when they first get there and they see the father, and Anakin pulls out his lightsaber on him, and then the father just literally puts his hand on the tip of the lightsaber and pushes the saber blade back into the hilt, which is very cool.
That's really cool.
But I think it's interesting as well that like Colin Trevorrow is pulling from some deeper Star Wars lore here. He's pulling from Clone Wars. He has a mention of Life Day in a line later on.
I mean, Rian Johnson kind of did the same thing as well with like Jedis being able to project themselves outside of their own body. That wasn't even from Clone Wars. It was actually in a book.
Yeah, in a random source book.
Yeah.
That was kind of cool to see Mortis return. So Poe goes off with Rey to try to find the location of Mortis, while Finn and Rose make their way to Coruscant to relight an ancient Jedi beacon to spread their message across the galaxy and call people to battle to take down the First Order. We get scenes where Kylo Ren goes and finds an ancient Sith master who is supposed to be the master of Darth Plagueis, and teaches him an ability where he can pull the life force from people.
Yeah.
He gets scarred earlier on by a Palpatine holocron that like shoots him with lightning. So his like face gets all disfigured and scarred. He's kind of able to like gain life force, and it kind of like temporarily heals his face a little bit.
Yeah, they also put like Mandalorian smelting armor like on his face to like heal him. For his helmet in Rise of Skywalker, they welded it together, which I think honestly looks really cool. Mm-hmm. And I kind of wish that that's what they did for this one. But in this one, they just gave him a brand new helmet. And it looks like there's, if you look at the concept art, it looks like the front of his face, where his mouth is, it has like an A almost where it is. It's kind of odd. But he gets a brand new helmet rather than a helmet that's welded together.
And then during this, we have Rey and Poe going to like this bazaar to try to find the location of Mortis.
Bonadan?
Bonadan, is that what the planet was called? I forgot to write down the name of the planet. All those sequences seem to be there to be very flirty and build the relationship between Poe and Rey.
I read this yesterday, and I remember like I actually put my face in my hand, just like sighing a bit, because there's that trope of like when you want to hide from the guards, so what do? You make out with the nearest person next to you.
Yep.
And that's exactly what they did to like make sure they weren't detected. And I was like, no.
I gotta say, I was not a fan of Rey and Poe, especially the way it's done in Trevorrow's script, because it feels very tropey of Rey being the tight-laced Jedi who needs to loosen up, and Poe being reckless and smarmy and is being the thing that he needs. And again, haven't seen Jurassic World, but from what I've heard about it, it seems like this is exactly like Chris Pratt and Bryce Dallas Howard.
To defend Colin Trevorrow, it kind of feels like a producer note to be like, hey, you know, it'd be great. We need a love story in there. And he's like, is Finn and Rose enough? And they're like, no, that's not enough. And it's like, all right. Well, the only other pairing that we really have is Rey and Poe going off together. So I guess we can force something there.
I don't know. I feel like it could have been a Colin Trevorrow thing, but it could go either way.
It very well. Yeah.
Then we get a really cool sequence where Finn and Rose light the Jedi beacon and sending a message from Leia across the galaxy. I don't know how it is in the graphic novel, but the way it's written really reminds me of the lighting of the beacons of Gondor in Lord of the Rings, where you get shots of ancient red beacons that like people don't even realize are technology, that just look like mountains and stuff until they glow, and this light shooting across the galaxy as like different people see Leia's message.
So in this, it's actually a green crystal. Okay. So they use a kyber crystal, which in the movies, kyber crystals never really seemed like a big deal in the movies. And I'm glad to kind of see that the Jedi power source can be utilized from these really powerful crystals. Although if you watch Star Wars Visions, almost every other episode in that is about kyber crystals, which is so weird.
That whole sequence, that was like one of my favorite things reading, because again, it evoked that moment in Lord of the Rings. There's a moment they're trying to convince Gondor to call for aid to Rohan. Mm-hmm. So Pippin sneakily goes up and lights this beacon, and then you get these beautiful landscape shots of basically a beacon gets lit and then somebody else is in an outpost and sees that and lights their beacon, and that's how the message spreads to Rohan.
And then what's really neat after that is that a bunch of these droids then get the message and they project it like how Leia is projected from R2-D2.
Yeah. It seemed like a very cool sequence to me. And then, of course, Kylo sees it and stops it with his crazy Sith magic and knocking out the signal before it can spread everywhere.
Yeah, and this has a bunch of TIE fighters who are actually like shooting down the tower, and Finn and Rose escape on a zipline.
Yeah.
At the last minute.
In the meantime, Rey and Poe get attacked by the Knights of Ren. Rey splits off from Poe and heads to Mortis.
And then Rose falls into a bottomless pit of darkness.
Oh, really? In the graphic novel? I remember that she gets split up from Finn.
They're on the zip line, and then one of the TIE fighters shoots the rope that they're on, and Rose falls into a bottomless pit, and Finn just swings off, and he gets away in safety. And we assume that she dies, but if she's going into a bottomless pit, we all know anyone that goes into a bottomless pit is always alive.
Yeah, well, it's not soon after that it's revealed that Rose has been captured by the First Order.
Yes.
And Finn has taken refuge with a group in the bowels of Coruscant. And Leia has a scene where she goes and meets Lando, who's now running a seedy nightclub.
Of course he is.
Of course he is. And tries to convince Lando to rally smugglers to join their cause. Then we get into the action-packed final act of the movie. Finn leads a revolt of these refugees against the capital in Coruscant and then gets aided by rebelling stormtroopers. There was an earlier scene where he was attacked by a stormtrooper, but then convinced the stormtrooper to take off his helmet and then, help convince the stormtrooper to abandon the First Order the same way he did.
They have this really interesting dialogue between the two. It's not that this person has been brainwashed, but his mind was just erased, where he's like, do you remember your name? And he's like,
yeah.
I don't remember anything. I just exist and I kill people. And he's like, you are a person. And all of a sudden he's like the butter robot in Rick and Morty, where he's like, you just serve butter. He's like, what? He's like, that's all you do. You serve butter. You kill other people. And he's like, what? But there's more to me. And then he just has this revelation.
Another thing I really like about it is he asks him his name and he's like, he doesn't have a name. And he's like, well, that's where it starts. Come up with a name for yourself. Again, that idea of being able to assert your identity being an important step in being able to kind of take back your agency and stand up against the First Order. And then Leia, Poe, and Chewie rush into aid on their stolen Star Destroyer. While this is happening, Rey and Kylo meet on Mortis and battle. Kylo Ren reveals that he killed Rey's parents because he knew that she was too powerful, which I think is probably the best way to handle the whole Rey stuff, because it does make sense that based off of how it is in Force Awakens, that Kylo Ren has some awareness of who Rey is. I like this because it keeps Rey as a nobody, but it still answers some of those questions. And I think it adds to the connection between Kylo Ren and Rey. And then in the battle, Kylo Ren slashes her eyes, blinding her. With Rey on the ground, blinded, all bloodied and beaten up, defeated, Kylo Ren goes to this well where he was supposed to see the ancient Sith power and finds it empty. Luke Skywalker shows up to basically tell him that it was a lie. Luke kind of encourages Rey to stand back up and get in the fight and remember the Force and remember her connections to people. And that's what kind of inspires her. In Rise of Skywalker, we get the voices of the Jedi kind of encouraging her to stand up. But in this, we get her calling out to Poe, to Finn, to Leia, to Rose. And that's what gives her the strength to stand up and fight again.
Okay.
I kind of like better because these are characters she actually knows, as opposed to a bunch of Jedi that the audience knows, but Rey has no clue who they are.
Yeah.
Rey stands back up and comes to fight while blind, and she even wraps part of her outfit, tears off a piece of cloth, and wraps it around her eyes as a blindfold, which that would have been very cool to see. I imagine that is very cool to see in the graphic novel.
Yeah, it is. So she gets this kind of huge cloth when the planet that she visits with Poe. Mm-hmm. There's a scene where she's in the marketplace and she's just trying to disguise herself. So she gets this big cloth that she can wrap around her. After defeating the Knights of Ren, she rips off some of the cloth to bandage herself, and then she uses part of that bandage and then takes that and wraps it around her eyes as if it's a bandage around her eyes. But much earlier in the script, they kind of alluded to this because there is a training session that she does. So when we see Luke training blindfolded, or not really blindfolded, but like he can't see. They have that helmet over his eyes, and he has like that little robot that's like shooting lasers at him, and he has to like use the force to detect where that is. She has like this sparring, like this interesting like spinning mechanical sparring mechanism that she uses to like try and defend herself. While in that sparring session, all of a sudden she connects to Kylo Ren, and then they battle. It foreshadows what is eventually going to happen in the third act.
Yes. One thing I also forgot to mention, there's a scene earlier on where she has a conversation with Leia about how she is somebody who embraces her connections more. Leia talks about how she's kind of becoming more than just Jedi. She's becoming something different and something new, and that's good.
Yeah.
Which again plays into this final thing where she gets strengthened because of her connections to her friends, continues the themes of The Last Jedi about how the things that need to change about the Jedi being good but still having problems. Things look really bad on Coruscant until Lando arrives with thousands of smuggler ships.
Yeah.
Hux watches from his tower, and to quote the greatest piece of descriptive text, I don't know if this is in the graphic novel, but it's in the script, quote, Hux realizes the tragic truth. He lost the Star Wars.
It's in the graphic novel as well. And he has his head hung low, his face is in the shadow.
And then he stabs himself with a purple lightsaber.
Yeah. Oh, man. I love and I hate it.
Oh, yeah,
but I love it more.
It's ridiculous.
But the fact that it's in the scene description rather than someone saying it, I think that's why I love it.
Yes. If it was a line of dialogue in the movie, that would have been awful. But the fact that it's in scene description is amazing. Kylo Ren gets redeemed at the last second and then dies, but his last words are telling Rey her last name, Solana. So we get Rey's last name, and I totally forgot where that name comes from, if it comes from anywhere. Somebody called Rey Solana on Twitter. In the description, it says that that comes from the combination of Solo and Organa. I don't know if that's actually where the name comes from for Trevorrow.
I think that's looking too far into it. I think they were just looking for a name that sounds like it's within the Star Wars universe.
It feels Star Wars-y, and it feels kind of Skywalker-y as well. Solana kind of evokes imagery of like the sun and Solaris.
To get the point across is that she is not related to any other Jedi that's out there. She's simply someone who is strong with the Force, and she is her own person, much like with Luke Skywalker. Mm-hmm. When we first meet him and he's strong with the Force, it feels like he's just an individual who was strong in the Force, and this wasn't anything that was inherited to him through his family. This is just someone who became that way. This is much like Hermione in Harry Potter, where even though both of her parents were muggles, she ended up becoming a wizard.
Yes. Rey then goes to Jedi Heaven, where Luke, Yoda, and Obi-Wan say they have learned from her about balancing the light and dark and balancing their connections. And there's also a medal ceremony where Finn, Poe, Rose, and even Chewie get a medal. And it says in the script, Chewie finally gets his medal.
Yes.
This would have been way better than the way they did it in Rise of Skywalker. It's not about anything that happened in the movie. That scene only exists in Rise of Skywalker because fans want Chewie to have a medal. At least here, it's after a thing happens.
And then I believe that there's a sequence in there where Chewie is actually flying a TIE fighter through one of the battles, and Poe actually looks up at that TIE fighter. And
he says, "That's one hell of a pilot,"
yes.
Just like Finn says about Poe Dameron. The true ship of the Star Wars sequel trilogy.
True.
And then at the end, Finn and Rose are starting a young Jedi sanctuary, and Rey comes back and hugs them. And it's a wonderful, happy ending to the saga.
Yes, I really enjoyed that ending. And at first, I was kind of mad because they didn't explain if she had chosen to come back in her human form or come back in a spiritual form.
It seemed like she was coming back in human form to me, because I think that kind of ties into the theme of her character of embracing her connections to people as opposed to trying to sever them like the Jedi of the prequels.
In the comic, she actually kind of like is an apparition. She kind of fades into existence, but she isn't like the blue light. She isn't in a ghostly figure. But if we remember from The Last Jedi, Luke Skywalker is able to project himself. And this is my interpretation of it. There's no actual definitive answer for this. This would mean that Rey has come back to life in her human form, but now is able to Jedi project herself where she is needed instead of actually physically going to those locations. That's very possible. And that would be the only explanation as to how that happens. She doesn't actually like physically interact with anyone. Like no one hugs her. She just appears and then that's the end of the movie.
I could be wrong, but I think in the script it said that she embraces Finn and Rose.
In the comic, it doesn't show she embraces anyone. It does say that her eyes have been restored. She has been healed.
Yes.
But we also saw in The Last Jedi when Luke projects himself, he has gray hair, or when he projects himself, he has black hair, seems younger. So he may seem healed. They never showed the hand, his hand, like if it was mechanical or not.
Oh, yeah, I think he's just got gloved hands.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see that if he projects himself, does he get his hand back? That's my guess, and that's the most plausible answer I can think of. Because otherwise, if she came back in human form, she would have to fly in on a ship to find them.
Unless she, like, materialized as a human on this planet and is now a human forever, you know?
That's also true.
I like that there's a part of this ending that is not 100% explained, and there can still be that kind of legends speculating on exactly what happened. Continuing the idea of the mythology of Star Wars.
Of Star Wars and the Jedi and what they're capable of doing, and maybe we don't fully understand. And because she's a whole new form of Jedi, and we even saw it when she meets the other Jedi, Yoda says something that's really powerful, which I thought was really interesting. He says, "We have learned much from you." Mm-hmm. And she's like, "Me? Like, how did you learn from me?" It's like, you have done things that no other Jedi has ever done before. You have opened up the possibilities for Jedi and Jedi-like, for her to come to this planet where Finn and Rose are like raising those who are sensitive to the Force, for her to come in and be like, all right, I can teach all of these kids to actually like use their Force in a unique and positive way.
Yeah, absolutely. So I talked about how Rian Johnson had a request for something to be changed at the ending of Force Awakens. Mm-hmm. Colin Trevorrow also had a request. There's something that happens at the end of Last Jedi that only is in there because Colin Trevorrow requested it.
Okay.
Do you have any guesses based off of what you know of this story, if you remember anything about the ending of The Last Jedi?
So there was the kid who was sweeping at the end.
I'll tell you this much. It doesn't have to do with Broom Boy. It has to do with something on the Millennium Falcon.
I can't remember what happened on the Millennium Falcon.
So at the end of the movie, the last of the Resistance gets onto the Millennium Falcon, and there's like a couple of little scenes of dialogue that happen. The thing that Colin Trevorrow requested was Rey and Poe having a meeting, because we never had a scene with them together before. And so there's a scene where Poe introduces himself to her. It's like, "Hi, I'm Poe." And she's like, "Yes, I'm Rey." And he's like, "I know who you are."
Yeah, and I think that's kind of why when we see Rey and Poe together,
that's what that scene is trying to set up. It's trying to start to set up that relationship.
Okay.
This is something that I've talked to Alexa about. She's like, "Oh, I'm totally fine with Rey and Poe being together." And I think that just probably has a lot to do with the fact that Oscar Isaac has chemistry with literally everybody on the planet.
Yeah. And had we maybe seen Rey and Poe interact with each other in this film, maybe.
Yeah, maybe I would be feeling something different.
But we didn't really get that in the first two movies, which is why it feels so out of place. Hell, even Poe and Princess Leia had chemistry together. And if you were just like, they ended up...
Poe had chemistry with that rock in that one scene.
So if they ended up together, we'd be like, yeah, that makes sense. So I think had we possibly actually seen this movie and actually seen them connect with each other, it might have been more believable.
When Poe calls out about Chewie's flying, that's one hell of a pilot. Yeah. Like, you can feel the chemistry.
Yes, you can.
I went into this expecting to not like this script and expecting to be like, well, it does some things better than Rise of Skywalker, but it does these other things worse. I liked this a lot more than I thought I would.
I did too. It didn't do the dagger MacGuffin.
Yeah.
Where they're looking at the
gosh.
shipwreck and they're just like, it looks like it. Never have I been so angry in a movie until I saw that moment.
I mean, really, the thing that I don't really like is the Poe and Rey stuff, but just about everything else I'm on board for.
We can admit that we could have been convinced.
Absolutely. And this gives more satisfying character arcs to everyone, especially Finn. We actually get to see Finn leading a rebellion.
Yeah, I think there's a line in there. I think it's actually in the description that says, like, he went from being a traitor to an abandoner to a leader of the resistance. And it was like just this level of him like rising up to it. We see Rose having a bigger role.
Yeah, getting to do things.
Yeah, we get a much more satisfying ending with Rey.
It feels like it has a stronger sense of theme than Rise of Skywalker does, especially with like how there's a lot of contrasting the way that the good guys win through relationships, through community, whether it's the refugees kind of banding together and helping each other, whereas whenever we see villains, it is all about being individualists and only out for their own goals.
Yeah.
And I think that is something really strong about this movie as well.
For Kylo Ren in his journey, I think it was really powerful to admit, I don't think you actually mentioned this, is that everyone keeps telling him, you are fueled by hate. And every time his response is, no, I'm fueled by power. Over and over and over again, he's like, I want power. I want more power. I want in any way, shape, or form to get this. And everyone who stands in his way is like, no, you are fueled by hate. You're going to the dark side, and that is just an empty vessel. You're not going to find anything. And to literally get to that planet, to remove, I guess, the sewer grate, to look in there, to be like, it's just an empty tube. There's nothing in there. And for Luke to appear and be like, I told you there was nothing there because what you're seeking for is nothing.
I like that. One of the things that a lot of people were saying was missing from Rise of Skywalker and is sort of in this, not quite as obvious, but the fact that Luke's last stand in The Last Jedi is supposed to be this thing that inspires the galaxy to come together again. In Rise of Skywalker, we get all the ships coming out, but we don't know why they're there other than Lando talked to them. But in this, we actually get a sense of Leia's message. We get scenes of seeing how people help each other out and band together. Mm-hmm. A lot of that stuff is just more satisfying thematically in this script.
Yeah.
So now we get to the question of what happened.
Yes.
This draft was dated December 16th, 2016.
Okay.
11 days after this draft was turned in, Carrie Fisher suddenly passed away. She was an important part of the script. Her passing carried more weight because Episode 9 was supposed to be her movie. And when I say that, what I mean is there was kind of a common understanding going into the sequel trilogy that each of the original actors would have their own movie to shine, where Force Awakens would be Han Solo's movie, Last Jedi would be Luke Skywalker's, and Episode 9 would be Princess Leia's. I mean, we get her message going out to the galaxy in Colin Trevorrow's script, which is like the exact halfway point of the movie and is a big deal. When she passed away, that could have really put the script in turmoil. They're faced now with an impossible challenge because nobody wants to see the character recast, definitely did not want to see her be CG'd. We wanted it to honor her legacy, and we're wishing we lived in a world where her character got to be a big part of this movie. When I said earlier that there's one thing that I disagree with about that webcomic description, is that he says that this is the script they were using from December 2016 to when he was fired. I don't think that's the case. I think that this script was rewritten afterwards, and that's where the problems happen. I don't necessarily have the exact evidence for that other than I feel like this couldn't have been the script they were planning on shooting after Carrie Fisher passed away. And I think that's where a lot of the problems began and a lot of the unraveling began. There were also things that were getting more tumultuous behind the scenes at Lucasfilm. Josh Trank was fired from his solo film before we even had an announcement of exactly what it was going to be. Rogue One went through extensive last-minute reshoots that ended up being headed by Christopher McQuarrie instead of Gareth Edwards. Phil Lord and Chris Miller were fired from Solo weeks before the project finished shooting.
I remember that announcement.
Yeah, that was a big one because they were literally in production in the middle of shooting when they decided to fire Lord and Miller. Lucasfilm was definitely having some more troubles with creatives and was not afraid to lose creatives along the way of a project. And I think also part of this was probably fueled by fandom getting a little bit more tumultuous at the time. I think executives were getting spooked and being like, we just want this to be as controlled and normal as possible. Yeah. And I think that the executives at Disney were starting to backtrack on this idea of letting a director make their movie. The other thing that happened was in summer 2017, Trevorrow's passion project, The Book of Henry, was released. Have you seen The Book of Henry or heard about The Book of Henry?
I've never heard of The Book of Henry.
Oh, so I haven't seen it. When it came out, it was regarded as possibly the worst movie of the year. People hated this movie. Written and directed by Colin Trevorrow. This was his passion project between Jurassic World and Star Wars.
This story is about me, my brother, my mom, and the girl who lived next door.
Henry and Peter, they're lucky to have you.
And your father's lucky to have you too.
Stepfather.
There's a genius 11-year-old boy who is world boy genius kind of person who is able to keep his family afloat by betting on the stock market because he's this 11-year-old genius who knows how the stock market works. But then he suddenly dies of a rare disease at 11 years old, and his single mother is now trying to keep their family together. And behind, he leaves a book. Again, I feel like I'm getting some details mixed up here. He leaves behind a book that details a plan to murder their neighbor who is sexually assaulting someone and is also the chief of police. So he's somebody that needs to go down, but you can't just kill him because he's the chief of police.
Oh.
Yeah. I don't know what's happening. I found an amazing review from friend of Weird Alphabet, Nathan Rabin, on his blog talking about bad movies. His motivation to help his mother was not to move on, but to get her feelings out by literally murdering somebody and getting away with it. Although I think at the end she decides not to kill him for some reason. I don't know. I did find this amazing quote from Nathan Rabin's review, which I recommend reading the whole thing. It is and isn't too bad that Henry dies so young. Judging by the film, had he lived, he would have become a production designer on Wes Anderson films because he wears very eclectic outfits.
Perfect.
He would have been the world's first ever American president / brain surgeon / rocket scientist / chairman of the Federal Reserve / best-selling author, or a Batman / Punisher type vigilante who thinks he's above the law because he's better than everyone else. People hated this movie. Soon after it was released, on September 5th, 2017, Lucasfilm announced that Trevorrow would be leaving Star Wars over, quote, creative differences.
They always say that. It's always over creative differences.
That's what they always say. There's a lot of speculation of exactly why. A lot of people pointing to the failures of Book of Henry. There were a bunch of rumors and speculations. There was a Wall Street Journal report that said that Kennedy was unhappy with Trevorrow's scripts, so hired writer Jack Thorne, who wrote Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, to rewrite it. Kennedy and Trevorrow weren't happy with that either, but rather than continue the chain of rewrites, Kennedy decided to fire Trevorrow and find a new director. That tells me that the rewrites and being unhappy, I feel like that happened because Carrie Fisher passed away.
Yes.
So they tried to rewrite the script without her. Kathleen Kennedy didn't like it, hired somebody else to rewrite it, didn't like that either, decided, you know what, we just need to find a different creative person for this. And this was also coming off the heels of Lord and Miller's firing. So it also kind of makes sense that Kennedy is of this mindset of starting fresh before getting too deep into filming, because that becomes extremely expensive to replace your director halfway through production. So if you're starting to get bad signs of a director, get rid of it before it gets worse.
Yeah.
It's not clear what she didn't like. Again, I feel like the Duel of the Fates script is pretty strong. The Carrie Fisher of it all is what I think is the key thing here. There is a rumor that Colin Trevorrow wanted Luke to be alive in his movie, which would have meant that Last Jedi would have had to be drastically changed, which is another thing that could have happened after Carrie Fisher's passing. Perhaps Colin Trevorrow said, now that I can't get Carrie Fisher, I want to be able to have an alive Luke Skywalker for my movie. Can we please keep him alive at the end of Last Jedi?
Yeah.
And that caused part of the problems as well. A lot of this is, again, rumors and speculations that were floating around different entertainment series.
Mm-hmm.
One of the other problems that people had with Book of Henry is a lot of sexism in that movie as well, specifically about this brilliant child knows how to live life better than his mother, and the way her character was written, which played into how people felt about Jurassic World and his original comments about female filmmakers in Hollywood. There was also reports that he had a massive ego after the success of Jurassic World. According to an article from Vulture, quote, during the making of Jurassic World, he focused a great deal of his creative energies on asserting his opinion. But because he had been personally hired by Spielberg, nobody could say, you're fired. Once that film went through the roof and he chose to do Henry, Trevorrow was unbearable. He had an egotistical point of view. He was always asserting that. When the reviews of Book of Henry came out, there was immediately conjecture that Kathy was going to dump him because they weren't thrilled with working about him anyway. He's a difficult guy. He's really, really confident. Let's just call it that. I couldn't even find exactly who said that quote, other than it was from an article from Vulture. It seems to me, though, that it was probably a variety of factors.
Mm-hmm.
I still personally feel like the number one thing that really knocked off the trajectory of episode 9 was Carrie Fisher passing away.
I completely agree with that, because that's not anything that you can plan for.
Yeah. And I think it's something that a lot of people don't bring up, because I feel like there's a lot of people in fandom who are looking for good guys and bad guys. Usually it's more complex than that.
Yeah. And I think what Kathleen Kennedy did was, I mean, she was in a place where she couldn't win.
Yeah.
There was no way that she could come out of this and come out better, because she had to finish the trilogy. She had to continue the series of Star Wars, and this just throws a wrench in all that.
And this is another thing that I didn't really put in my notes, but Disney executives were really set on their release dates.
Oof.
Originally, Force Awakens was supposed to come out in summer 2015, and it got pushed back to December by J.J. Abrams' request. He was requesting Rise of Skywalker be pushed back, and Disney executives were like, no, this is coming out December 2019, come hell or high water.
That's pretty hard to deal with, especially when you're doing like, I got to get some rewrites in there. That's not working. And eventually you're going to hit that point where it's just like, you know what? We just got to go with good enough. We can't settle for great. We just have to do what is good enough.
Absolutely. Less than a week after it was announced that Colin Trevorrow was fired, it was announced that Episode 9 would be directed by J.J. Abrams and co-written by Argo and Batman v Superman writer Chris Terrio.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not a fan of J.J. Abrams, but boy howdy am I not a fan of Chris Terrio. So, reaction to Rise of Skywalker was not good. It received the worst reviews of the new trilogy by far. A lot of people still hate Last Jedi more, but I think Rise of Skywalker has more people who dislike it. I think the temperature of hatred towards Last Jedi is stronger, but there's a lot of people who are not into Rise of Skywalker.
Yeah, and I remember watching that movie, and I just felt it was just a disappointment. It's hard to blame anyone. I knew in the back of my head, I mean, I don't know the story behind it, but I knew that so much of it was riding on Carrie Fisher and her absence, it was felt.
Yeah.
You could feel it in the movie, where even in her dialogue, they were talking that they had filmed some things with her.
All the footage of her in Rise of Skywalker is alternate takes from Force Awakens.
Yeah, so a lot of it felt generic. It didn't feel like she was talking with anyone.
We're getting reports of a raid at the Festival of Ancestors.
This mission is everything. We cannot fail.
Any word from Rey?
Falcon's not responding.
You have to say it like that.
Like what?
Do me a personal favor. Be optimistic.
It was hard to watch knowing that they had to deal with this situation. It's hard to deal with.
And I think another big part of this is literally 2 years after it was announced that J.J. Abrams and Chris Terrio were making this movie, it came out. So they had a really rushed production schedule compared to Colin Trevorrow was announced 4 years before Episode 9 was supposed to come out. I really feel like the rush production schedule is a big part of it. For big budget movies like this, it takes time to prep the sets and prep the effects and prep those sequences. I wouldn't be surprised if there was a situation where they had a lot of sets and sequences that they thought this would be cool for the movie before they really thought about why it's in the movie.
Yeah.
And so they kind of had to be like, well, we know we want to have a scene on the crashed Death Star, and then later had to figure out a reason why it's actually in the script.
Yeah. I could definitely feel that there were a lot of moments and sequences, and you can actually see this when you finally read the comic. You actually will start to notice and recognize some of the set pieces that were then used in The Rise of Skywalker.
Connolly and Trevorrow have a story by credit on Rise of Skywalker. I wouldn't be surprised if there's set pieces that were not in Duel of the Fates that then Trevorrow and Connolly wrote into the script that ended up being in Rise of Skywalker. And those sets were already being made by the time that J.J. Abrams came on board.
Yeah.
And that is kind of speculation on my part, but it really feels like a likely case. A lot of people blame the failures of Rise of Skywalker and the failures of the trilogy as a whole on the fact that the story was not planned out beat for beat at the beginning. And we've kind of gone over a lot of that and kind of my opinions on that take and why I don't think it's the most logical, but it's certainly something that a lot of people have talked about since then, because Kennedy let each director do their own thing. In an interview with Collider from this past May, J.J. Abrams was asked if the film should have had a plan from the beginning. And his response was really interesting and had a lot of really great things to say. He didn't really say one way or another. He mostly said that having a plan was important, but, quote, there are projects that I've worked on where we had some ideas, but we hadn't worked them through enough. Sometimes we had some ideas, but then we weren't allowed to do them the way we wanted to. I've had all sorts of situations where you plan things in a certain way and you suddenly find yourself doing something that's 180 degrees different. And then sometimes it works really well and you feel like, wow, that really came together. And other times you think, oh my God, I can't believe this is where we are. And sometimes when it's not working out, it's because it's what you planned. And other times when it's not working out, it's because you didn't have a plan. It really seems like he's saying like, hey, sometimes the plan is the problem. Sometimes not having the plan is the problem.
Plan for problems is the moral of the story.
Yeah. It's a little too easy to say like, this is where it all went wrong. Part of the problem, again, with Carrie Fisher passing away was the expectation that this was going to be Leia's movie. There was a plan that was in place that couldn't happen. Trying to rectify that plan in fandom's eyes is where everything kind of spiraled out. One of the reasons that we go back to the original trilogy and how it wasn't planned out from the beginning, Han Solo is frozen in carbonite at the end of Empire Strikes Back because they didn't know if Harrison Ford was going to return for Return of the Jedi.
That's pretty great.
They literally wrote that in so that way they'd have a way to kill him off if they needed to.
Huh. Or Mark Hamill got in a car accident and messed up his face, and because of that, they had to explain it. So
they wrote in the Wampa attack.
Yeah, didn't plan for that one, so they had to put it in, and now it's one of the most iconic scenes in the film.
Yeah, not long after Rise of Skywalker came out, the script for Duel of the Fates was leaked online, and Colin Trevorrow confirmed that it was indeed legitimate. Immediately, fans started praising it as something they prefer far more than the movie that we got, and saying that Trevorrow should have never been fired.
Yeah.
I feel like it's not as simple to say that Trevorrow should have never been fired, because I do think, for me, the reason where Duel of the Fates, we could not have seen that script.
Yeah.
And I agree that that script is better than what we got for Rise of Skywalker, but part of that is because of the production issues, and not necessarily because Trevorrow is better than J.J. Abrams.
Yeah.
Who knows? The scripts that Trevorrow was writing after Carrie Fisher passed away could have been way worse than what we got with Rise of Skywalker.
Yeah.
My big point here, and this is why I say that this podcast might save Star Wars, because if people are willing to realize that it's not about good guys and bad guys, and it's about a lot of different factors that cause these films to turn out the way they turn out, we can accept when things don't turn out the way we want. Although I will say, there is one thing that Rise of Skywalker does that I would never want to let go of. And that is, of course, the greatest Star Wars character of all time, Babu Frick.
Hello, hi, Babu Frick.
Why, hello.
I want to go back, though, to the Kathleen Kennedy of it all.
Okay.
Again, a lot of people blame her for not steering the ship. I feel like Kathleen Kennedy was the wrong person to produce a sequel trilogy, but is still the right person for Star Wars. If you look back on her career, she only produced one sequel, and that was Jurassic Park 3. She's never been somebody who is interested in sequels and franchises, unlike somebody like Kevin Feige, who is all about sequels and franchises. Literally, his whole career is Marvel franchise.
Mm-hmm.
So I think when it comes to trying to make a large narrative that spans over the course of multiple films, I think Kathleen Kennedy was not the person to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But she is the person to choose interesting people and let them make interesting things, and creates what I think is what we're going to get out of Star Wars, and what I'm really excited for with Star Wars now.
Okay.
Like what I said about the whole double-edged sword with Shyamalan,
Mm-hmm.
we get high highs and low lows with Star Wars right now. I like every single MCU movie more than Rise of Skywalker, but I like Last Jedi more than every single MCU movie. Star Wars under Kathleen Kennedy isn't going to have that consistency of quality, but it does mean that it could reach those massive, massive heights. And I think we're seeing that with like Star Wars Visions. Have you watched Star Wars Visions, Dan?
4 or 5 episodes of it, yes.
Because that's something where those episodes are all over the place, and it's very clear that different people are going to love some and hate others.
Yeah.
And that's really exciting for me, because the Star Wars stuff that they've announced now is not continuing the big grand story. It's, let's get this story. Let's have this interesting person make a movie. Oh, you know what? Let's just give a movie to Taika Waititi and see what he's going to make.
Yeah. I mean, you can look at the films and be like, oh, that background character right there. Like, what's going on with him?
Yeah.
And just staying within the Star Wars universe and not having to stay with Skywalker and his family.
Yeah. In an interview from Bob Iger, he talked about how George Lucas was disappointed in The Force Awakens, not because it did anything wrong, but because it didn't do anything new. George Lucas wanted to see new ideas and new technologies and new characters. And, well, he got new characters, but George Lucas wanted to see the universe keep expanding. He was disappointed that Force Awakens did not expand it and traded on nostalgia. That's why I'm really excited for the future Star Wars, and I'm happy to have Kathleen Kennedy heading this, because getting the grand story, the numerated films, I don't think is going to work out, but I think we're going to see incredible stories because of her philosophy from here.
Yeah.
That's what I got to say. Those are my Star Wars thoughts, my Duel of the Fates thoughts, and airing out my opinions of Star Wars as a whole.
I'm glad this is a great therapy session for you.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I get so upset about fandom sometimes.
Yeah.
Did you got any other final thoughts to say about this, Dan, before we bring it to a close?
I remember I had a deeper meaning about this from when we were doing the Weird Alphabet and we talked about Star Wars and we did Saga Begins. we seem to put Star Wars on a grander pedestal than kind of what it deserves. Like, yes, it has a significant position in pop culture and in film history, and has definitely revolutionized filmmaking and people who become filmmakers. It's very inspirational, but we kind of have to remember that Star Wars is good, but it's not great. And that's something not to diminish Star Wars, but to kind of keep us humble. Also, if George Lucas asks you to make a Star Wars, you go and make a Star Wars.
Yeah, here's hoping we someday get that Rian Johnson trilogy. I really am skeptical if it's ever going to happen, but they still haven't said it's not going to happen, so.
Yeah.
Still holding out hope. Knives Out 2 will be exciting, though.
It will be. It'll be great.
All right. Well, that's going to go ahead and wrap up our episode. Thank you, everybody, so much for listening. If you want to find more episodes of this podcast, you can go check out our website, pipedreampodcasts.com. While you're there, you can check out Come On Fahugwa Pods, Mystery Shack, Look Back, Escape from Vault Disney, or the aforementioned Weird Alphabet, which is not still making new episodes, but go listen to our 200 episode archive.
Yeah.
You can also find us on social media. We're on Twitter at HDTNGM. We're on Instagram at How Did This Not Get Made? And you can send us your emails with thoughts or suggestions, notgetmade@gmail.com. Thank you, everybody, so much for listening.
Thank you.
And we'll see you next time. May the 4th be with you.
And also with you.